Welcome to Activations with JJ Ascension message. In today's episode, I'll be talking about how to more easily connect with your guides, as well as continuing upgrades to the nervous system. These are two hot topics that have been coming through in a lot of sessions lately, and so I'm excited to dive right in. Welcome, my friends, to another episode. I'm so honored to have you here with me as we co-create through the podcast. And it's always fun to experience the different ways that we do co-create, because in this particular case, you are not here live with me listening, and that means I get to visualize you here. I get to connect with you energetically, and I am sending you all so much love and gratitude. It's always so beautiful to be able to feel your presence. And I am very, very appreciative also of any comments that you do make on the videos, because it helps me be able to see the ways that these things are affecting you. And also, I've noticed in the comment section of the videos, if you're listening on YouTube, people are able to help others with questions. And it's a beautiful way to support each other through this journey. So today is very interesting. I'm popping in here with two topics that have been coming out a lot lately in my Akashic Records reading sessions. The first one has to do with the question that I ask people at the beginning of the session. And what I always do to prepare to head into the records is ask them which guides they would like to bring along. And sometimes they say they know they have guides. We know I have guides, but I'm not sure who they are. I feel them. I can hear them in my clairaudience or my clairknowing. They're there, but I'm not sure. I can't specifically name them. Now, other times people will say, oh yes, I work with Mary Magdalene or Isis or this Ascended Master, or I have galactic family members and I know their names. And it's really interesting the range of responses I get when I ask that question. So I have felt over the last little while that it is important for us to begin to specifically connect with who our guides are. One of the reasons for this is because we are fully stepping into our sovereignty, into our I am presence. And in order to do that, it's important for us to have choices, right? To not just feel like, oh, bring down whatever it is, but also to initiate connections. And so what I am going to begin doing from here on out, as it's dropped into me, and Spirit was like, well, maybe your question isn't very empowering. That happens a lot lately. A lot of times we have to watch our verbiage, because what we're doing, even in our questions, is it's indicating little programs that we have running. And so, which guides do you connect with most? I don't know. What about the question, which guides would you like to bring through? Which guides would you like to invite into our session? Now, again, people still might say, I don't really know who they are, but this is where tuning up our psychic senses is coming into play. And this is a theme, one of my themes, as I mentioned, just one of mine, that I feel is very, very important for 2023. Everything that I do and that I create is intended to help you better attune your psychic senses and empower you in some way, so that you are looking inside yourself rather than having to look outside yourself for answers. And so what my guides dropped in as I was preparing to record this particular episode was have them ask for guides to come in. Well, in order to ask for guides to come in, you're going to have to do a little bit of homework, right? You're going to need to get familiar with Ascended Masters. You're going to need to get familiar with angelics. You're going to need to get familiar with galactic races so that you can have an opinion. Because if you're not informed, there's no way to call in that specific energy. Now, I do understand that there are times where you are going to feel like you want to connect with an energy, but you don't really have a name for it. And that's completely fine. A lot of times when I feel that, I'll just say, I want to connect with my wispy, etheric guide who feels feminine. And I could give her a name, or I could ask her what her name is, and that's perfect too. Sometimes they're fine with that. They don't all use these labels like we do. They're not attached to these identities. But for us to fully specifically call them in, we can give them names. In fact, that's what I think sometimes they do. They'll give you a name that's familiar to you in this world. They're not going to give you some 30-syllable name or vibration that sounds like a cat meowing or something, because that's a little bit harder for us to attach to. In this life, we attach to names that are 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 syllables long. And that's what they're going to do. And sometimes it'll be in kind of a light language that you might be familiar with. Sometimes it'll be a name that you already know exists and that is a common name in your language, right? They're still working within our framework. Now that's for beings that don't really have a name or aren't already known ascended masters. Now with regards to the ascended masters, the angelics and that, this is where, again, I want to invite you over the next little while to begin connecting with different ones. One of the best ways to do this is there are a lot of oracle card decks that exist where you can begin to familiarize yourself. One of the most interesting things came through as I was preparing for our next round, our next cohort here in the spring of the Priestess portal, which I am co-facilitating with Amron Bevels. If you aren't familiar with what that is, if you're new and haven't heard me talk about this before, I'll leave all the links below. But what happened is we entered into the winter session of the Priestess portal, and I learned so much. Every time I co-create an offering, even though I'm not necessarily quote unquote a student, I am 100% a student because I am learning as I go. Isn't that what we're doing here? There's so much energy coming through so quickly. There's so many new downloads, so many upgrades. We're all just kind of treading water sometimes. And that's what I feel like I'm doing. I'm a student and a teacher at the same time. So what happened is something that I noticed in the group that came forward, and we had just a beautiful, beautiful time together, was there were some of the participants who weren't as familiar with goddesses. And I'll be honest, I was not at all familiar with goddesses. This is not something I studied. I probably knew some of the basic ones. I definitely knew some of the Greek goddesses, the Roman goddesses, some of the more common ones. And the way that I got to know them was last July when I did the Syrian Gateway. And I really felt like the goddesses were coming in full force. I started studying. I had a beautiful friend that gifted me a deck of goddess deck, and it's such a lovely deck. I'll put the link below too. But these are the ways that I learned who they were. I would put their cards up on my desk. I would line up 5 or 6 cards, and I would just start connecting with them and bringing them into my field. So I want to encourage you, if you have any suggestions of good decks, I'm not really an oracle card deck collector per se, so I want to invite you to drop in the comments section if you're listening on YouTube with some of your favorite decks, how to connect with archangels or galactic family members. In fact, I have a galactic family member deck coming down the pipeline. I actually want to create an oracle deck so people can be more familiar with these star races. And then again, the goddesses are really good to connect with, ascended masters. So there are so many inspired people out there creating these decks. Become familiar with them so that when it's time for you to call them in, you can already know who they are. You can already be somewhat calibrated to their energy. That is something that, again, I'm really feeling strongly is a theme that's coming forward for you to be able to specifically call in, step into your power and say, who do I want on my team? Instead of saying, who's on my team? Who's up there? That's very disempowering to come from that angle. And believe me, I'm the first one that's been there doing that. So I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying our guides are encouraging us to be more forthright with who we want to call in, to empower ourselves through our language and through our requests. We are powerful beings. We are powerful creators. We are light workers here. We're way showers. We are not the ones on the side that are waiting to be told what to do. We are the ones that are giving sort of the directions. We're the ground crew. I know a lot of people have heard that terminology. We're the ground crew. We're in the bodies. We have that privilege of calling in the spiritual guides that we want to work with. Now, there's kind of this interesting dynamic that happens in my sessions and in my gatherings. If you haven't made it to a virtual gathering, I highly recommend you do that, because you're going to see me and how I do this literally in live motion there, where you're seeing me connect with the guides and call them in, okay? We call them in at the beginning of my gatherings, because I always say to everybody, okay, let's call in. Who do you want to call in? Which elementals do you want to call in? Which galactics do you want to call in? And then if it's like a Lemurian or Atlantean theme, I always say, okay, let's call in Lemurian priests and priestesses, our soul aspects that are Lemurian wisdom keepers, etc., etc. So as we call those in, and not only do we call them in, but then I also have them come into my awareness. There's kind of a two-way thing going on where I call them in, and then I'll have other ones that say, would you like my help? And they're always honoring our free will. Do you see the difference there? Not, I'm barging in to help you, but would you like my help? And when I do, I always want to use verbiage like, welcome. We invite you in. We call you in. We would love to co-create with you. It's the same when I do a gathering or when you have a party. You don't just kind of wait for your friends to show up. You let them know the time. You let them know the place. Let them know the purpose of the party. So I want you to think about that a lot more in the coming weeks and months. Every time you sit down to meditate, every time you sit down to be maybe in a session, in a one-on-one session to get a reading, I want you to consider who you've prepared to co-create with you, who you've called in advance. We're becoming a lot more intentional. We're not like we're needing to become a lot more intentional with these things. It's important for us to become more intentional. We're moving at a pace that is very rapid energetically. And this is actually a good segue into my next topic. And in order to do that, we need to call in our full team. And we need to be aware of that. And I encourage you to do that. All right, sliding into the next theme, which I mentioned has to do with the nervous system. This is a very fascinating set of circumstances that have occurred over these last couple of weeks in my life and in the lives of my friends. What you may have noticed is some interesting triggering experiences happening over this last little bit. For me, I've had some conflict arise. Now, it wasn't like conflict that was really close to me. It was kind of in my outer realms, but it was conflict nonetheless. It was someone's energy who was coming in very defensive, a little bit attacking towards me. And it was done through like digital communication. So it wasn't anything physically, in my space. But still, a lot of you know what I'm talking about. You may have even turned on a show or gone into a comment section somewhere and just felt, this energy come through, and you got triggered. And the word is, and the key is being triggered. Now, when we are quote unquote triggered, we oftentimes have that fight or flight response that's there, that comes right to the surface. This is part of our programming, part of our physiology that we are slowly releasing as we transition into the 5D, as we transition into our light bodies. It's a calming of that fight or flight response that we're being invited to begin to facilitate. Now, the only way that our guides can measure, because they are measuring, I guarantee you, read Dolores Cannon's books. You will see that oftentimes the galactic family members are sort of testing to see how our bodies are doing on the planet. And so they'll take you up into a ship while you're asleep, and they'll assess you, and they'll see like, okay, what's going on here? How fast is the body responding to the upgrades that we're bringing in? And that's exactly what I've been feeling. In fact, I had a session with somebody. We started off the session, and they had a rough couple of months. And they had said, gosh, I've been triggered, and these things have been coming up. And I'm like, very fascinating, because the same thing's been happening to me. I had my guides let me know that it had to do with the nervous system. But when I saw what happened in this session with someone, I realized it was a little bit more than that. So she's taken up to a ship. She's put into like a med bed type situation. And I'm seeing her, I'll say her galactic guide, however you want to look at it, with a clipboard. And I saw them connect her to some different little wires and sensory things. And I'm like, okay, this looks like a monitor of some kind. like when you get an EKG, right? And so as I was looking at them, they were taking notes. They were like, yes. And I could literally feel that energy coming from them, like they were learning as they were assessing the body and they were scanning the body. And when I asked them after the fact, they said, oh, we've been testing her nervous system. We've been placing these circumstances in front of her, or, however that works. But we've been noticing that these things have come up, and we are now measuring how much of certain chemicals are happening in the body that are showing how much she's being triggered. Because our goal is that as these circumstances arise more and more and more, not that they're going to increase, but, just every so often they happen, right? We feel these trigger situations come up every so often. They're actually measuring to see if we're coming into a state of sort of equilibrium where that fight or flight isn't so easily set off. And so I want you to think about that. If you also have been having different things happen in your life, people triggering you, circumstances triggering you, more than likely your nervous system is being measured. Now, what do we do with that information? Why does that even matter? The circumstances are still happening. Obviously, we have that part of us where we can sort of use cognitive, CBT, cognitive behavioral type things to consciously, this is more like Joe Dispenza, your thoughts are in charge type things, to calm ourselves down, right? As soon as we feel that fight or flight, we go, oh, I know what's going on here. I know exactly why this is happening. Don't personalize it. Don't emotionalize it. See it for what it is. It's about a chemical response in your body. And then shut those chemicals off, right? Make yourself come into a state of zen, if that's how you want to see it. But that's not the only resource you have. Your brain is not the only, your conscious mind is not the only resource you have. Let me remind you that you all have guides, galactic family members. They all have access to a lot of different technology, instruments, therapies, as it were, that you can receive in the etheric realms, on ships, that will help you accelerate this transformation of the nervous system. So you can lay down at night, and as I mentioned before, it's all about standing in our sovereignty and calling in what we want. What do you want? Say, hey, man, my nervous system's a little frazzled. I want to continue to take steps towards that 5D state of unity consciousness, deactivating that fight or flight response, and coming into a place of just calmness more often, where you're not feeling that. And so as you do that, you call in your guides. My kind of go-to is my Arcturian star family. They are extremely advanced in attuning the body. And so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, can you please put me in a healing chamber and have some kind of calibration done to my nervous system to continue to allow me to come into a state of this sort of Zen state. There's lots of words for that, I know, in lots of different cultures, but you know what I mean. And then receive that upgrade to the nervous system. Now, I do have a couple of videos on my YouTube channel. I'll put the links below that also address this, that could assist you with it. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes I just put on quiet meditation music, set my intention, and do it. It can be the same for you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. I hope that we've at least dipped into these topics enough to get you thinking, to expand you in some way into a thought pattern or a realization that you hadn't had before. I'm extremely grateful to you for your willingness to co-create. I'm looking forward to connecting with so many of you in the coming weeks and months. Let me let you know what I have going on. It's quite a bit. There's no slowing down for me in 2023. There are several live events, virtual events, and bigger offerings that I have going on. So let's start with my live events. On the 25th of February, I will be in Scottsdale, Arizona at a beautiful venue called Chantiful, where we'll be holding a galactic workshop. It's called Starseed Activation. We'll be connecting with our cosmic family through light language, meditation, activation, and I'll be doing 4 public readings there, which is always fun. I get to have somebody come in front of me and we find out which star family was coming forward for them and bring through messages. It's a really fun time. I'm doing the same kind of workshop in Manhattan on the 19th of March. So that's not until a little ways from now. But if you are in that area, I am also going to be doing a starseed activation workshop. In addition to that, at the same time, March 17th and 18th, I'll be in Connecticut at the beautiful Angel Co-op, where they have an incredible shungite room. It's literally a room that is got shungite on the walls and on the floors, and I do one-on-one sessions there. I think I still have a few spots left for those. But I'm also doing a goddess activation workshop on the 17th, and then a Lemurian group past life regression and healing on the 18th at the Angel Co-op. This is in Connecticut. You can look at the links below to find out all the details. So those are my in-person events that are coming up in the next few months. In addition to that, many of you know that I offer live virtual gatherings. They're 60-minute gatherings. I do those every month. I have 6 different offerings. On February 12th, this is just in the next couple of days here if you're listening to this right when I publish it, I'll be having my Fairies, Dragons, and Elementals gathering. And I'm finally doing it in a time zone that works for you all from Europe. All of you from Europe, all of my soul family that's in those parts of the world. It's not going to be in the middle of the night anymore for you. So I'm really excited to co-create with you. Fairy and elemental energy is so strong in your part of the world. And there are many of you who I have done readings for that are so connected to the elementals. So I'd love to have you join me for those. And I have my light language circle. Anybody who's wanting to dabble in light language, understand light language, be exposed to light language, my light language circle is also happening on February 12th. Now, speaking of February 12th, there's one last offering. It's kind of like a last chance deal here. I'm doing my 5D business activation workshop in collaboration with Queenie from Reiki and Flow. She is also a light language channel, a multidimensional channeler, and both of us have a background in corporate. So we're bringing together all that we know from corporate, all that we know about the energetics of business. We're putting it into a workshop that is actually going to span over 2 days. It's 2 3-hour sessions, one on the 12th of February, one on the 18th of February. For those of you who are not able to make it live, we will be launching this as a pre-recorded course on our website in about a month. So if you're listening to this way after the fact, don't worry, you can still access that content, but we would love to have you live. The advantage to being live with us is that we will be fielding questions, right? We will be fielding questions and you will be able to get those responses live, anything that's coming up for you that you really want to know as we work through the contents of the course. So much to look forward in the next little while. The one last thing that I do want to mention is, as I said earlier in this podcast, I do have my collaboration with the Priestess portal. And that is a larger, longer length offering. Very, I would say, intensive, calibrating, upgrading, initiation, sacred space, all of the things. It is a way and a place for me to deliver very high vibrational channeled messages and activations that I can't always do in my monthly gatherings. So if you kind of feel like you're ready for the next level, that offering is for you. The link to sign up is below. There's also a way to just do like a discovery call to get like a more of an orientation if you're not as familiar. There's all kinds of resources if that piques your interest. My friends, again, as always, I am sending you so much love as I wrap up this episode. And I want to remind you that I am you and you are me and we are we. I look forward to co-creating with you in the coming months. Until next time.